little squeaky little figure writing for a left-wing newspaper because he hasn't really got his snout in the trough, really.
If Juvenal was alive today, he'd be a kind of right-wing literary disc jockey pandering to everybody's most atavistic instincts.
The women that he attacks, the passive homosexuals, the foreigners, are the people that he wants to screw verbally.
Juvenal is speaking in the same sort of language of disapproval as an Old Testament prophet. Woe to the city, and so on.
We know almost nothing about the man who first wrote that money is the root of evil, and asked who guards the guards themselves. The Dictionary of Quotations is full of phrases he wrote 2,000 years ago, but of their author, all we can say for sure is that he's one of the rudest men who ever put pen to paper. Juvenal attacks and ridicules human failure in every sector of society. There's something in his satires to offend all tastes.
What is more insufferable than a well-heeled female? She presents a sight as funny as it is appalling. Their features lost under a damp bread face mask, or greasy with vanishing cream that clings to her poor husband's lips when he tries to kiss her. But it's all wiped off for her lover, of course. But with all these medicaments, it makes you wonder what's underneath. A face or an ulcer?
This is the kind of talk we shall soon hear. Oh, I must go downtown tomorrow, first thing, special engagement. Why, what's happening? Need you ask? There's going to be a wedding. Old so-and-so's got his boyfriend to the altar at last. Just a few close friends invited. You've only got to wait now. Soon such things will be done, and done in public.
If a debtor refuses to pay back the sum I lent him, my case will have to wait. It'll be set down for the most crowded and popular session, and even then I'll be subjected to 1,000 irksome postponements. The courtroom will have just got ready, one lawyer's taking off his cloak, another one's gone out for a piss, and then presto, there's an adjournment and we all disperse.
Poor old Juvenal is mugged by yobs, ripped off by his landlord, and driven mad by the traffic. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Today we breed a race of degenerate weaklings that stirs high heaven to laughter and loathing.
The raw material for Juvenal's 16 satires may have been first-century Rome, but his targets are just as recognisable today, and so are the methods he uses to attack them. Juvenal began a tradition of satire that's continued right down to the present day. Mocking denigration, witty critique, urbane moralising, putting the comic boot in. All the greats in English satire, Pope, Dryden, Johnson, Swift, Byron, they're all in a direct line from a bad-tempered man in a grubby toga.
Literary Romans were articulate to a fault because their education was a rhetorical education, and it included declamation as a regular exercise. So they not only shot their mouths off, but they shot their mouths off in formal style.
So they were eloquent at whinging.
Yes, they whinged most artistically.
Today, jostled aside by men who earn legacies in bed, who rise to the top by that quickest and most popular route of rich old matron's funnel. Oh, each lover gets his cut. A full 1/12 of the estate, or 11/12, depending on the size of his services rendered.
Juvenal is strong on double entendre. Graphic smut is a useful comic tool, as he would no doubt have put it, against the decadence of Rome. The old austere city-state had become a sprawling imperial capital, a magnet for corruption of all sorts, financial, political, and of course sexual. As many a pretty slave boy was to discover.
A good deal more than the mind is broadened by travel.
As the empire first expanded, then stabilized, Foreigners of all sorts were attracted to Rome. Some came as slaves, and then some of them were freed. And what you might call the country gentry, which I think is what Juvenal really belongs to, resented this.
So you had a dispossessed group of people who used to be in power,
Yes.
or families who used to be in
Yes.
power, who now had nothing to do.
That's more or less right.
And what did they do instead?
Well, they complained.
Right.
When some creature blown into Rome along with the figs and damsons precedes me at dinner, me, who drew my first breath on these Roman hills and was nurtured and nourished by Sabine olives, well, things have come to a pretty pass.
The capital is full of foreigners, it's full of upstarts, social upstarts, these freedmen who've come in with chalk on their feet, who've suddenly made a mint and now they're running things. These pushy women even, who are muscling in on the act. Everybody is there alienating this good old Roman, and he wants society to stay as it is, where everybody knows their place.
Juvenal felt the old middle classes, the professions, were being overtaken by the spivs and the wide boys. It's a familiar complaint. Juvenal gets particularly irritated at the fact that his old barber has made a fortune, and he keeps putting him in lists of undesirable nouveau riche, along with the Syrian merchants and the Egyptian traders and the Greek actors and the gladiators and the pimps and the prostitutes. Meanwhile, the educated classes are losing out. Academics, for example, are on the poverty line, while school teachers get an even worse deal.
Pupils nowadays will sometimes beat up their instructor. What schoolmaster, even the most successful, commands a proper return for his labours? See to it, you're told, and when the school year's ended, you'll get as much as a jockey makes from a single race.
It's the old story. People in useful jobs make nothing, mere entertainers make a fortune, while the serious money is reserved for the wheeler dealers, the white toga criminals.
The pattern is pretty consistent. They raise a city loan and squander it publicly. And when it's just about exhausted and the lenders are looking pale, they skip out to some smart watering place for a cure of oysters.
Credit fraud seems to be as much a historical characteristic of the rich as stuffing in oysters. And oysters for the Roman rich are only the beginning. Juvenal describes them guzzling pheasant, hare, boar, lobster, lamprey, eel, bass, gazelle, antelope, peacock, and even at one point flamingo. All this is dished up by Asiatic servants, expensive but very fashionable, and eaten off tables of ivory carved into the shape of leopards. And after the food's finished, it's over to the silver inlaid couch to watch the Spanish dancing girls. And then, onto the tortoiseshell bed for a massage, with oil from a rhino horn flask. Consumption couldn't get much more conspicuous.
You'll pay the price all too soon, my friend, when you waddle into the bath, your belly still swollen, a lightning heart attack with no time to make your will.
It's certainly an amusing thought. Juvenal knew, however, that the main victims of greed are not fat men having cardiacs. The main victims are the Roman people, who suffer when public life is corrupted to the extent which he describes. Juvenal sees the degeneration of duty, public service and responsibility into the instincts of the piggery. That's a phrase coined not by Juvenal, but by Robert Maxwell, a man from another age who Juvenal would no doubt have recognised.
When you start putting together everything that Juvenal is attacking, excess is the thing that comes to mind. He is temperamentally a great Puritan. He really hates wealth. He hates self-indulgence. He hates the kind of happy-go-lucky aristocratic lifestyle. And that explains his popularity through the ages. You never go wrong by attacking excessive wealth or the nobility or anything like that, because your audience is going to consist largely of have-nots who will always enjoy that kind of thing.
the rich and powerful of the Roman age can ride roughshod over the have-nots because the plebs can be bought off, to quote one of Juvenal's most famous phrases, with bread and circuses. And the aristocracy, who should be the natural leaders, are the greatest Philistines of all. The worthlessness and cruelty of the Roman ruling classes is one of Juvenal's most persistent themes. But the rot didn't stop with worthless aristocrats, and Juvenal follows it right up to the emperors, though not the emperors in power at the time he was writing. Juvenal regrets the demise of what he calls our outspoken ancestral bluntness, but he knows the limits. He's not facing a libel writ with a fine at the end of a court case.
Name an imperial favourite and he'll soon enough blaze like one of those human torches, half choked, half grilled to death, those burnt corpses that they drag with hooks from the arena and leave a broad black trail in the sand behind them.
So Juvenal sticks to defaming emperors who are safely dead. This is an attack on Domitian.
Such was the case not so long ago when you-know-who was busy reviving those stern decrees against adultery, while he himself was flouting the law and spicing his crime with a dash of incest. His niece, a fertile creature, had her row of abortions, every embryo lump the living spit of uncle.
This is fairly strong stuff, but then Juvenal accuses the Emperor Nero of murdering his entire family. Moreover, Nero gets attacked for writing bad plays and for singing tunelessly on stage, which for Juvenal is obviously an even more criminal offence. He accuses the Emperor Otho of being a homosexual and of taking a mirror into battle so that he could check his hair.
He says, I won't attack the living, that's too dangerous. I will only attack the dead. But, and there's a big but here, nobody, as a satirist, can entirely ignore their own times. In fact, that is where they're coming from always. And he may have set himself up a beautiful piece of exploitation of the present regime with the protection of saying, well, I'm only really attacking the dead.
You're a very good live emperor, but I'd be a worse one dead. Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me.
Juvenal was not a revolutionary. He was no Spartacus calling for an overthrow of the state. He wrote angrily about the mistreatment of slaves, but then he wrote angrily when they got uppity and started pushing him off the pavement. Like many satirists, Juvenal was essentially a conservative, challenging the operation of the system rather than the system itself.
There's no room in this city for the decent professions. They don't show any profit. So, farewell, Rome. I leave you to sanitary engineers and municipal architects. Men who, by swearing black is white, land all the juicy contracts just like that. A new temple, swamp drainage, harbor works, river clearance, undertaking the lot, then fraudulently file their petition in bankruptcy.
Life in the country is simpler, and the people are more decent, more honest, more Roman, or more British, or whatever. In one of the few personal references in the Satires, Juvenal says that he himself has bought a small farm in Tivoli, in the Italian countryside. Like Juvenal, certainly in the later Satires, you live here in rural splendour, attacking the city.
Well, I only live here 4 days a week. I spend 3 days in London. I think people go mad very, very quickly in the country, especially in England, and you dream of Reds under the bed or whatever. And one does see among one's neighbours a lot of madness from people who live here brooding about the horrors of town.
The country, for the satirist, is the symbol of a golden age, largely of his own imagining. a stick with which to beat the barbarians at the gates.
The thing which fills me with endless gloom is the thought of more and more money being given to the working classes to spend on their unpleasant enthusiasms, which can only make England an uglier, dirtier, noisier place for everyone else to live in. Transistor radios, sweets, caravans, frozen food, plastic flowers, gramophone records, souvenir spoons from dreadful places, and fitted nylon sheets.
There is a reaction to think Bron is absolutely barking mad. Is there not a similar pleasure in Juvenal?
Well, I think it reads better when it's written than it does 2,000 years later, I'm afraid, because everything, the whole art of journalism is judging what you can get away with. And that's an absolutely contemporary judgment. So you say, this is clever, this is daring, this is good, or this goes too far, this is yuck, this is disgusting. But it's entirely the judgment of the moment. And you can't expect the same judgment to survive even 10 years later, let alone 2000.
Do you not enjoy the sheer madness of the invective?
A lot of it is pretty well meaningless. It's all sort of inveighing against obscure Roman ladies for having it off with barbers or whatever. And who cares, you know? It's this awful little thin, mean thing saying, ooh, promiscuous women, not nice. Ooh, she had 2 men.
That's enough.
He is a sort of Puritan. He belongs to the Puritan tradition of satire, which is saying how disgusting, you know, he had sexual intercourse with somebody who wasn't his wife, that sort of thing, which is all very well, but there's a limit to it. And really he was the sort of Sun newspaper of his day, making exactly the same points the Sun makes, or usually from a point of view of jealousy and sort of misery.
Off goes Sophia's wreath. She challenges the call girls to a contest of bumps and grinds, but herself is eclipsed in turn, an admiring loser, by the liquid movement of Medalina's buttocks.
The 6th satire is the longest and most vitriolic Juvenal wrote. And its target is simply women, all of them. It's a no-holds-barred hate letter to the female sex, a sustained exercise in splenetic misogyny that makes it probably the most politically incorrect piece of literature ever written.
Hear what Claudius had to put up with. The minute she heard him snoring, his wife, that whore empress, would make straight for her brothel with its odour of stale, warm bedclothes, its empty, reserved cell. A more than willing partner, she took on all comers for cash without a break. Too soon for her, the brothel keeper dismissed his girls. She stayed till the end, always the last to go, then trailed away sadly, retiring exhausted, yet still far from satisfied, cheeks begrimed with lamp smoke, filthy, carrying home to her imperial couch the stink of the whorehouse.
Many of the older editions of Juvenal do not translate this sort of passage. Discrete rows of dots appear instead of thighs splashing with passion or itchy Roman matrons who don't draw the line at donkeys. Admittedly, it's not ideal material for school libraries. This one's from St. Paul's School. And hello, it's the 13 satires of Juvenal. Seem to have lost 3 somewhere along the way. Guess which 3?
Isn't it better to sleep with a pretty boy? Boys don't quarrel all night, or nag you for little presents while on the job, or complain that you don't come up to their expectations, or demand more gasping passion.
There seems to have been a sort of responsible homosexuality in the Roman world and an irresponsible one.
Yes, I mean, there was the idea that there was a stage, you know, which you went through when it's perfectly proper to fall in love with one of your own sex. That's the Greek idea, as I say, you know, rather like Eton, perhaps.
Yes.
And then you grow out of it and become a respectable married man.
He never loses an opportunity to put the boot into grown-up gays, people who preserve the lifestyle all their lives, especially passive homosexuals.
Do you think it's easy or fun, this job of cramming my cock up your guts till it's stopped by last night's supper?
The crucial thing for the Romans is who does what to who. And the penetrating partner, whether he is penetrating men, boys or women, is okay. The penetrated partner is the one in the subordinate position, power-wise. Satire has been likened to a verbal form of priapic activity. The satirist is there with an erect penis and he's trying to screw a lot of people with his words.
Juvenal is aggressive, but is he xenophobic, misogynist, homophobic, racist, the archetypal dead white European male? Or is some of it for comic effect? How seriously are we meant to take it all? It's possible that some of the over-the-top characters that Juvenal brings on are the Roman equivalent of Alf Garnett, and that the audience was meant to laugh at them. It's always difficult to distinguish the author from his comic persona, especially at 2,000 years' distance.
Here, a citizen free-born has to stand aside on the pavement for some wealthy tycoon's slave. He can afford to squander a senior officer's income on classy amateur harlots, just for the privilege of laying them once or twice. Whereas if you fancy a common or garden tart, well, you dither and hesitate. Can you afford to accost her?
We should see satire, Roman satire, as a dramatic form. These are basically monologues with various characters coming on stage and doing their bit. And we can create that sort of distance that we need from the material.
Of course, you can't be indignant all the time, especially if you live comfortably and have a pleasant time, eat well, drink well, have an agreeable everything. So you have to sort of ham it up. And that's one of the devices you use, is pretending great repugnance and fury, when really you're just trying to stir things up a bit.
Out of those front row seats, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Your incomes are far too small, and the law's the law. Make way for some panda's son, spawned in an unknown brothel. Or let your seat be occupied by that natty auctioneer's offspring with his high-class companions, the trainer's brat and the son of the gladiator applauding beside him. Such were the fruits of that pinhead Otho's reserved seat act.
What comes across is that he feels it passionately and genuinely. Nothing comes through quicker than fake protestations.
Juvenal would have been an outsider, a new man. He was not himself a member of the sort of great nobility. And you require very great talent as a new man to reach the top. Satirists tend to be people who have not made a great success of life. Either their merits have been insufficiently recognized, well, that's usually the case, or they have simply found that this new social circumstances work against them. I suspect Juvenal lacked charm. He may have been too proud to try to ingratiate himself, but one has the impression that he had tried and failed.
By the time of his later satires, Juvenal seems to have given up trying to get on in the city. As he gets older and withdraws from the fray, he gets less savagely indignant, and his targets become less personal, more general. Which is why different ages have been able to find different appeals in his writing. For the Christians of the Middle Ages, it was his attitude to sin, sex, and money. For Dr. Johnson and the 18th century Augustans, it was not so much the anger of the early satires that appealed. The Juvenal they admired was the later, more detached poet of philosophical disillusion. The Juvenal who analysed the futility of all human aspirations, what Johnson called the vanity of human wishes. Sex and wealth disappoint, certainly, but so do the more grandiose human ambitions. Political power? Consider the story of Sejanus, an emperor's favourite.
Some men are overthrown by the envy their great power arouses. It's that long and illustrious list of honours that sinks them. The ropes are heaved, down come the statues, axes demolish their chariot wheels. The unoffending legs of their horses are broken. And now the fire roars up in the furnace. Now flames hiss under the bellows. The head of the people's darling glows red hot. Great Sir Janus crackles and melts. That face, only yesterday ranked second in all the world. Now it's so much scrap metal to be turned into jugs and basins, frying pans, chamber pots.
Satire tends to be pessimistic in its view of the world. It's not on a high moral platform. It's not trying to give a programme of how you can change society for the better. It tends to be pointing out the bad things.
Any journalist, let alone satirist, who thinks he's going to influence events really ought to be locked up, because, I mean, he should be in there with the other politicians if that's what he wants to do. No, it's entirely to provide a sort of civilized entertainment for people who aren't involved in the struggles of our time, who aren't trying to reform society or make it even worse, as the case may be. It's entirely a spectator's sport.
Satire does not take a wide or generous view of the human condition, but in certain moods, when you feel sour, disillusioned, bilious, Juvenal is somebody who expresses that mood probably better than, or as well as anyone has ever done.
Like most satirists, Juvenal believed that nothing could be worse than the time he lived in. When forced to locate the virtue, which is his touchstone against corruption, this contemporary urban cynic finds it in the lost simplicity of the past. Because what can you expect from the present? What can you ask the non-existent gods for?
Mens sana in corpore sano.
A sound mind in a sound body. That modest hope is Juvenal's most famous phrase of all. But he was confronted by a Rome full of unsound minds in extremely unsound bodies. Result? Difficile est satiram non scribere. It's difficult not to write satire.